The Ego Power Plus Savings Event is on at Lowe's. Right now, get a free Select Ego 56-volt battery with purchase of a Select trimmer, blower, or mower kit. That's a $299 value. Plus, shop today for new and exclusive items you need for your lawn. So get ready for spring with the latest in innovation from Ego, the #1 rated brand in cordless outdoor power. Only at Lowe's. We help, you save. Offer valid through 4/16. Selection varies by location while supplies last.
This podcast is sponsored by Date My Age.
Dating after 40? Let's just say it's different than it was when I was younger.
What is it they say? Men are like parking spaces. All the good ones are taken.
Does it feel like your dating pool gets smaller as you get older? That's why there's Date My Age, an online dating platform that offers an unmatched global reach. With users in over 40 countries, we're helping singles connect all over the world.
I went from feeling like I had no options to having so much to choose from.
Date My Age connects users based on mutual interest and similarities, not only their location.
When I saw all my matches, it seemed impossible that I wouldn't find the one.
Ready to connect with singles across the globe? Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Bill in Northern California.
Good morning.
Andrew in Southern California.
Hey guys, what's up?
Doug in Scotland.
I'm just going to go with the generic hi. Like, God, calling Andrew, man. Like, you can't really go higher than that. So I'm just going to keep it mellow and be like, hey, everyone.
And I am recording from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in a parking lot.
Wow.
Wow. Hyannisport.
How's the East Coast doing?
Oh, it's very rainy, foggy. Yeah, but I'm going to make the most of it. I'm flying back home tonight, so I've been on the East Coast for a couple of weeks, but I'm ready to go back home. But I haven't ever seen Hyannisport, so I'm like, I've got a few hours. You know, I might as well take a look.
Yeah, because it's beautiful and sunny and clear and getting warm today. And I mean, I don't know, it's California. It's kind of like that, like 240 days a year.
Yeah. Of all days, I was hoping for a nice day. But that's okay. I'm going to make the most of it. So I didn't even introduce that this is the CRM Archaeology Podcast, by the way, if you didn't already figure it out from the hosts. This is episode 309, and I'm your host. And Doug is our, MC of an interesting topic. And so, Doug, I'm going to let you take it away.
Yeah. So this week, it's actually like a sort of overarching, like blob topic that's going to hit on a lot of things. But one thing we're going to talk about is basically, reporting, how to do anonymous whistleblowing if you want to. But some of the nice side effects of that is actually, it's a good way to also like increase, like 500% the number of shows you can get on Netflix as well. So there's a lot of advantages. So maybe if you're not worried about needing to stay sort of anonymous and do anonymous whistleblowing, you might want to stick around for, Turkish soap operas and how you can get them. So our topic is whistleblowing, and there might be a whole different range of situations. So I don't know, you might currently be working in the federal government and they've just banned the use of the word archaeology, or they're rewriting your report so it's no longer a plantation, it's a summer holiday for Black folks or something along those lines.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Or you're in the private sector and, stuff's going down and, maybe there's abuse or certain things going on in your work, but you can't really report it up. And, you need to do an anonymous one. You're afraid of retribution. That could happen as well. Maybe it's not outside of your organization. Construction's happening. You're on a monitoring site. They're bulldozing through things, not letting you do your job. You need to report a client. Again, but you don't want retribution. I think there's like a bajillion different possible scenarios in which you might need to be able to sort of stay anonymous on the internet and do reporting. So that's basically sort of this episode. How to do it, how to stay safe. Gosh, it sounds like we're doing like high school sex ed or something like that, but this is all about keeping safe online, keeping anonymous, and being able to report. So again, lots of different ways to do it. And before we jump into sort of how the technical side of it, we should probably just cover, something's going wrong and actually who do you report it to? Heather and I had a great conversation, and we can't go into details, but we're both pretty much on the same page of, if something's going down at work, HR is not your friend. We won't go into details on that, but yeah, you're not wanting to report to HR because, they're there to protect the company and maybe not necessarily there to protect you. But there's other situations as well. And I think we should probably just open it up and sort of talk about there's the organizations you go to, what sort of newspapers, if you want to go to newspapers or websites or local TV, there's all that sort of stuff as well we should cover. So I was just going to throw it out there. Now I'll throw it around to the other hosts about good organizations to go to. And one I was actually going to say, this is probably one that people won't think of, homeowners associations. If something's going sketchy on the archaeology that's happening and you want to report it and you have to be close to or a homeowners association is involved, definitely go to those guys because, man, if there's ever a group of people who will get irate about anything, it's a homeowners association.
I mean, I could probably agree about that. I mean, because of homeowners associations, I almost always aim for homes that were built before or have an ancient homeowners association that's like it. And when I lived in Tucson, the homeowners association provided a security service for trick or treat because we had a lot of trick or treaters, and they sponsored a hay ride and the porch fest, right? So it was nobody was really watching your house for weeds or spazzing out because your car is old and they say it's broke down. But I stay away from them in general. I was going to say something about the HR though, because I think in a couple ways, HR could actually end up being your buddy if you had buddies in HR, right? The problem is when you're on the one side of the fence and you don't know anyone in HR because HR knows all the rules, right? So those, paychecks that were a little bit light that, you can't seem to figure out what happened to part of, a different aspect, hours that you worked, right? I used to have a guy who would track the hours to the absolute second. He seriously was handing in timesheets that were 6 minutes difference. And the boss was like, well, how come this guy's, saying that he's owed 14 minutes this week or something like that? I'm like, because he's keeping absolute track of every moment from the second he walks in the door to whatever. And she was like, well, then make sure that he gets home before 5 o'clock because I'm sick of giving this man 78 cents more or something like that per day. But that was a function of him knowing that, who to complain to, who in the HR department to ask, and, that person being open to those kinds of questions, right? The thing that folks are afraid of and think that HR is only supporting the business is when it's time for layoffs or when they're just anonymous action figures that HR doesn't know. And they're just yes, I will do whatever the boss says. I will just go ahead and march through the rules. The rule book says I eliminate this many jobs, right? So when you actually know someone, and I'm telling you this from personal experience because my wife has worked in HR for 20 years, that when you know and you have friends in HR, it's almost like you have a support staff. Not that I'm 007, but if you did have a skunk works that can help you with all these extra tools, that's what's up.
Oh, okay. So I understand both sides of it. I would say that if you were having a problem with your supervisor, just be careful, because number one, when you start sharing things with HR, they actually have a responsibility to act on those things that you're sharing. So understand what you're getting into when you're talking to HR. Understand that you're giving them an action item. They're not your friend. They're not somebody who's your therapist. If you say something to them, they are going to do something they're going to act on it, because that's their job. If they don't, they could lose their job for it. And when you do complain about somebody, a supervisor, you just have to understand that, as wrong as it might be, sometimes there's retribution, and there's soft retributions. And so you have to kind of assess what are the issues that you're having, and what I would try to exhaust every means necessary before you go to HR. That's just my opinion. Unless, of course, you do have a friend in HR, like somebody like really is a friend outside of work, and they can give you some insight. But otherwise, I'm just telling you, I've been burned. And my supervisor was completely in the wrong, and I call it soft retribution, because you couldn't actually pin it on them, and you couldn't say it was whistleblowing. But what they did was they just slowly created a narrative about you that's not true. And they're the ones that were in the wrong. And so I think, and then the other thing, I would say with HR, or if you're having issues talking to people, or if you do talk to HR, talking to them in a very indirect way, not saying, I'm having this problem with this person. Say, I'm curious. Use it almost like a hypothetical, or you could even say, if this were to happen, I've been talking to, a friend of mine, your friend yourself. And if they're having this problem, what would you suggest they do? They may just say, talk to HR, but maybe you get some information. But I just be real careful.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sort of, I would step back and just make sure you want to go down this path of doom and gloom, because maybe you do, and maybe it's obvious, But in my years as department chair, I kind of had to split the difference. You hear me moan, in my years doing this, because I will say that 9 times out of 10. I would get somebody, whether it's a student or a professor, who is just really pissed, in the moment about something. And it's this idea of I'll go to HR, right? And it's I would just recommend chill out, take some time, think like a lawyer, is this really a thing, or are you just mad? Is this a real thing? And then if your answer is yes, and I will say in my experience, usually the answer is not yes, right? But sometimes it is. And so then if it's yes, and you want to go down that road, think like a lawyer. And Heather, I thought what you just said was really smart, acting in the third person, kind of being theoretically, what would happen if this? And then kind of get your ducks in a row and go from there and write everything down and all that kind of stuff.
Even if you're right. So I'm going to piggyback off what you're saying. Even if you're right, and your supervisor is 100% in the wrong, and they're nasty, and I'm telling you, they protect the company, they protect the supervisors, because it's not just about doing, and it's a shame. And this isn't always the case, but I tell you, I've experienced where it is. And they are protecting themselves not only for the, the supervisors and the job right now at hand, but they're protecting themselves in case you leave and sue.
Yep.
So they're already creating their story, and you have just, you have to make sure that what you have is able to be documented.
So watertight. Holy crap. I know.
But also the other thing too, is they, in some cases, are actually trying to solve problems like what you're talking about. Right. So
I agree.
It might've been at a smaller company. I'm not just, so yes, HR is there to protect their own job. They're there to protect the company. But in best case scenarios, a functional human resources department is also there to help you. It's there to help you get promoted. It's also there to help you get paid and, uphold your rights. Yeah, it is true. They're going to, you need to go it a lawyer-fied pathway. But I mean, in best case scenario, and a boss is being an asshole, sorry, I don't know if we're allowed to say that, they're there to get that boss, either you away from that boss, that person transferred, or get them out of there.
But that doesn't, and so here's kind of the answer, really. If that boss is protected, HR is not going to be able to help you, because in the situation that I had, the HR person, I had a person in the HR that was wonderful. And I know she felt a lot of sympathy for my situation. She absolutely did. I know she was very genuine in what she was saying to me, and she was stuck too. And it was a real shame. But in that case, do you really want to continue working for this company anyway? I know sometimes, you don't have a choice, you need to work, but that is something you need to think about, is that if you're going to continue to be fighting uphill all the time, they may, I had it to the point where I was ready to leave. The company tried to beg me to stay, gave me a lot more money to stay. My next 2 years were horrible. Even though they asked me to stay, they paid me off to stay. I stay, and my next 2 years were horrible. I mean, awful. It was probably one of the worst times in my life. It was horrible. So you just have to think, like, if they're showing you for who they are, believe them and move on to another company, because it's not going to get better. It's so systemically bad. Unless there's a complete overhaul, it will not get better.
I'm going to wrap us up. I'll end with also another, depends on your where you're at, but also we had an episode a couple I don't know, probably like a year or two ago, talking about how the laws are very much against unions, and unions are pretty handicapped. This is one area where they're not. So if you actually do have a union, they are a good resource to go to, because their rep will be almost like an HR person, so we've been on the other side of it for you. So if you do need someone, you can also, if it's available, check out your local union. But you also just be aware, you need to be in the union first. A union's not going to help with pre-existing conditions. So make sure you're in the union if you need help with stuff like that. But I think we should wrap this up and then come back with, how you might report anonymously.
The Ego Power Plus Savings Event is on at Lowe's. Right now, get a free Select Ego 56-volt battery with purchase of a Select trimmer, blower, or mower kit. That's a $299 value. Plus, shop today for new and exclusive items you need for your lawn. So get ready for spring with the latest in innovation from Ego, the #1 rated brand in cordless outdoor power. Only at Lowe's. We help, you save. Offer valid through 4/16. Selection varies by location while supplies last.
Welcome back to segment 2 of CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 309. Doug, take it away.
Yeah. So last sort of bit, we've talked about, reporting who you might report to inside your organization. I was just going to throw out, we've done homeowners association, community groups outside, and you might also want to consider maybe, I wouldn't say, chances are, no matter what you're reporting, it's not going to be national news worthy, but local newspapers or local TV stations, or I guess local podcasts. I think we should probably throw it out for something like that, news related. There's a whole host of other organizations, if you're looking external, you may want to report to, and or not report to, but pass on some information, a tip of some sort. There's a lot of nonprofits, depending on what area you're in, who might be willing to take on something. I don't know if you're working, the new system of NEPA or anything like that. I don't know, maybe it's related to environmental issues. You might want to go to like Sierra Club or something like that. But do you guys have any, before we jump into how you protect yourself and make sure that you can stay anonymous and even pass it on, because even local news, They can be subpoenaed. They can.
Yeah.
There's different ways for people to basically get a hold of your information. So we'll get into how to stay anonymous. But before I do that, do you guys have thoughts on other organizations to go to?
I do have a thought on it, though. Before you go down the road of going to organizations, just make sure that you have a good understanding of why you think what's happening is not correct. Because you may not know I shouldn't say the whole story, but you may not, like I've heard people that do not understand the law and they start reporting things that they don't realize what's happening is not incorrect. So let's say somebody, and this is just a major exaggeration, right? But let's say somebody just comes out of school and there is a resource and it is considered significant, but the project cannot avoid it, cannot feasibly avoid that resource. And so it will be demolished. But a data recovery is going to occur beforehand. But if you're new to archaeology and you come in and this is your first project, the idealist might think this can't be impacted at all because it's a significant resource. And then they go and they, I know that's an exaggeration. You would think hopefully that they've learned enough in college to know that's not the case, but just make sure you do your homework and understand that the concern that you have is legitimate. So
totally. I would also add, you're going to, again, have to think like a lawyer. Look back and see what you signed when you started with that company or whatever. There'll be some sort of contract. If you're in a union, there'll be some sort of contract. It's so much more powerful if you're like, I'm suing this company over Section 6, Article 3, because they broached this, then that's really great. Because if you're going to go down this path, you're going to have to get lawyerly and you're going to have to know, your contract, the mission statement of the company, that kind of stuff. That can really help.
I would also add, this, we're going to give you the tools to do it, but you could even be in the rights and no one's going to pick it up. There's a lot of things happening in the world. You could do an anonymous report to HR and they could be completely swamped with mass layoffs at that moment and are not going to look at it. You could report it to the local news and there's a massive wildfire destroying everything and that's going to trump whatever you're doing. So also just to add, even if you are in the right, just because you report it doesn't mean anything's going to happen. I would still encourage people to do that. And as everyone said, make sure, get your facts right first, but also just be aware that stuff happens, life happens. It can be very important to you and it can be very important to several other people, but other events happen. They can always push it to the back burner or just not allow people to have the time to actually deal with it.
Yeah, I don't know. In terms of the public stuff, like the media and all that kind of thing, I would sort of very heavily caution against that. Again, I've already said it 4 times, but think like a lawyer. A lawyer would never want you to go public. That is a slippery slope of doom and gloom.
Yeah, and I also keep wondering, what would be the gravity of the issue that you're going public? And to me, the only thing I can think of is sites being fully destroyed, things that are known to be archaeological sites, not, they're working and then we're trying to figure out if it is a site. We're talking actual sites being ripped. That is probably, the kind of thing that you would want to go to the press. And once again, that's not really a HR kind of thing necessarily, unless somehow your company is the one that's let's get in the backhoe and our archaeology company will rip this site. Because was mentioned before, you got to just be able to argue your case. And I don't know. I don't think that getting stiffed on $25 per diem is enough to be going to the local news over.
Exactly. It's got to be like an Aaron Brockovich. Hey, there's plutonium here and people are dying.
So one way, if there is a site, I know this because I've heard it from people that think, CRM companies, and I'm not saying all CRM companies are alike, right? As good as they should be, but most CRM companies are good and they're not going to obliterate and go right through a resource for, it's actually not worth it because in the long run, the company gets a bad reputation and that would hurt them. But if that does happen, even better than the press is the lead agency. So whoever the lead agency is, you can report it anonymously. Definitely still, though, try to do something in the normal manner, which is, making sure that your company knows that there is a resource here. And sometimes, you may not know the whole picture. And if that still doesn't happen after that, then, the agency is actually the oversight. They're the ones that are supposed to be monitoring, making sure that mitigation measures are being followed properly, that projects are being permitted properly. So you're going to get further than the newspaper, honestly, because they're the ones that have the ability to change things.
Yeah, there's usually sort of a hierarchy of things you should go through. So issues, if possible, go internally, push it up. Next, lead agency, but also depending, you could also think about also maybe going to the SHPO as well. If it's a problem with, like, say, the lead agency or something like that, there's that overlap. TIPOs as well. In the law, there's sort of multiple organizations and different branches of different types of government you could possibly go to. And then, you could go to nonprofits, and sort of your last resort is really you go into the news sort of aspect. So, yeah, it's a bit of a hierarchy of trying your way through and seeing if anyone's going to be willing to help you out or take it on. We should probably jump into, because we spent about half the episode talking about who to go to and whatnot, how to actually go about it. So, yeah, there's a lot of things. And I think Heather sort of said, brought up issues that, there's going, and then there's also the potential of having retribution. That could be hard retribution. That could be soft retribution. It could also just, like, in a way, potentially ruin relationships as well. And, it could be one of those things, if you start reporting stuff, maybe it's not very serious, but maybe, instead of getting asked to do some extra work or more fun work, it goes to someone else. There's a whole range there. And so there's quite a few reasons why you'd probably want to stay anonymous to report. And I think we should talk about, the different tools that you can do that. And just to give everyone sort of a background, if you're not really into security, there's actually this concept, and we're going to actually talk about it because it's actually the name of some of the products, but they're sort of like what they call, like, onion security, which is you peel back layers. And the idea is that if you're going to do something anonymous, you actually need to take a bunch of different levels of protection. And so if one fails, there'll be basically another layer that you might hopefully have there to protect you. And so, yeah, jumping off on the top sort of, we'll start with basically the messaging and work our way back through these different layers of protection that you need. So first up is basically, if you're going to send something and you want to be anonymous, you probably want to send it through basically a secure channel. And that would be one, basically, if someone were to, say, digitally intercept, I should actually say, we're going to talk about digital means, the old-fashioned, you cut out letters from newspapers and paste it onto a letter and send it in. Yeah, that's physical. You could do that as well, but we're going to talk digital here. And basically, you want to start out with, like, encryption. And essentially, that is, if someone gets a hold of your message, encryption basically means it's unreadable to them. For now, there's stuff happening with quantum computers where essentially, I won't go into the complexities of the math, but in a couple of years, potentially a decade or so, a lot of modern encryption is not going to, they're going to be able to crack it. They are coming up with sort of anti-quantum computer encryption. It's so new that people are not 100% sure if it's going to work or not. So, in 10 years, this might all be moot in that they can crack your message anyways. But basically, you want to send any sort of message via a encrypted channel. My recommendation is actually Signal. You guys may have heard about it in the news. It's basically a messaging app, but it does encryption. And the reason I'd say Signal over, say, WhatsApp, which also does encryption, and there's probably, I don't know, dozens, if not hundreds of other messenger apps out there. You kind of want Signal because it's open source, and there'll be a lot of smart people looking at it to be able to see if there's any sort of backdoors built into it that might allow someone to read the messages. And I mean, this sounds sort of like NSA, whatever, but actually, like, companies buy cracking encryption software. There's like a whole business of people actually sort of selling quote unquote military grade equipment to private entities. So if they wanted to, they could probably be able to break it. And, there's court orders as well. And the reason I say Signal is because potentially with a closed system, governments have already got backdoors, or there already are potentially backdoors into something like WhatsApp. I use the UK, so it's finally made it into the news. They did a court order to keep it out of the news, but Apple won. But actually, basically, the UK government is trying to put a backdoor into all of Apple iPhone Messenger. One of you guys will know better. I don't have an iPhone, but it's iMessenger? Is it? Does anyone have an Apple phone?
I don't know. Yeah, I have iMessage, but I don't know what the heck it's called.
Yeah, it's iMessage.
Yeah, iMessage.
Yeah, so potentially they managed to get that out, but there'd be a lot of secret orders that go in. So a lot of those closed source messenger apps might already be compromised. And that's why I would always recommend go with, essentially an open source, one that people can check and see if you can do it. So your first line of defense is if you're going to send a message, try to use something that is encrypted. So there's Signal for that. And then there's also some encrypted emails as well. But I think we'll pick that up on the other side of the break.
Welcome back to CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 309. We are talking about, well, as Doug said, a blob of information, but we've been starting off on like kind of whistleblowing, and now we're talking about how to communicate anonymously on a digital, from a digital perspective. And so we're going to focus on that in this segment. And I actually had a question for you, Doug. What do these different means that you're speaking about, would they protect you if you're using a company computer?
Oof. So that's like, you kind of slightly jumped ahead there, Heather. I was going to work that our last sort of layer of defense, which is the short answer is absolutely never use a company computer to do this. And this is also true for phones as well, because we just talked about Signal, but they don't need to crack the encryption if they have your phone. Like if a lot of companies actually put sort of tracking software and messaging software, especially some of the bigger ones. Also, if you're working in defense, sometimes that's required of actually companies to get security clearance. Is basically they let the government, or usually when I say the government, it's usually like a subcontractor in there to do all the security stuff. So, anything you're doing, do not use company equipment, because basically, even if it's encrypted, they can have what you've typed. There's ways around that. There's programs that basically record all your keystrokes. So essentially, never use company equipment to do this. Use your own, and towards the end, we'll get a way of sort of protecting your own computers as well, too. So,
and I would also guess, going with that, and I've actually seen this before, don't use your company email.
Oh my gosh.
I've seen this.
Yes, absolutely. Do not use your company email. So honestly, I probably would, if you're doing this by email, so if you're not using a messenger, there are probably hundreds of temporary emails. And so this is actually one of the fun, side things about protecting is, you guys have always go to like a website and they'll be like, ooh, sign up to get access to this article, or they force you to basically put in an email, and then they bombard you and they sell your email to like a list, and then the next day after you've signed up you have like 400 spam emails, all that sort of stuff. There's actually a bunch of services which are basically 20-minute or 10-minute temporary emails. So basically you sign up for it, you send it, and then everything gets erased and obliterated after, I don't know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It depends the service you're using. But it's a great way to also, if you need to like get behind that paywall on a website, and you don't want to give up your own email, just go to one of these. We'll put one in the show notes, but you can Google like temp emails, and there'll be a bunch of services, and it'll so help you like avoid getting bajillions of spam emails in the future as well.
Yeah, when you're given a company computer or a company phone, make sure you really read the fine print with the company handbook and understand what it is, what's allowed to be done on your company computer, because we all know sometimes people aren't crazy about a certain individual working for a company. They've just gotten disillusioned, or maybe they no longer need you. California, it's an at-will state, but people, companies are very risk averse, so they're not going to be, let people go without some kind of cause. And so, a lot of those fine prints, make sure you read the company handbook. I mean, if it says you can't do certain things, make sure that you know what those certain things are, so that those can't be used as an excuse to let you go.
Yeah, and another comment too is maintaining separate, total separation between both, right? So if you have a work phone, then only use it for work, and then don't use your personal phone to like log into work stuff and to, send a bunch of messages through like work, because then that means that your personal phone is also just tied up in the same thing. So, that's another thing to think about, because a lot of times, we're checking our emails and just whatever device you've got, you log in, but you got to kind of be wise about that. And that's something that the question I have though is, what if I'm not talking about slander or whatever, but what if you're texting and talking with people that you work with, and then they're just saying, oh yeah, well, any communications with anyone you work with, we got to see all devices. So if you are keeping it all separate, right, you are only accessing work stuff on your work computer and then keep it all separate. Like, where do they draw the line there with that?
Yeah, I don't know. That's if they pay for
as Heather said, it'll depend on the states, it'll depend on the country and what's permissible. But a lot of times, it'll be in the fine print of your contract, which basically just says, some of them will be just basically like, any device that you use related to work, they have the right to be able to install, or like they can put all sorts of spyware on it as well. So like, yeah, there's not really a one size fits all answer. It will depend on the local laws, wherever country or state you're in, plus whatever the company has basically given themselves permission to within those laws to do.
So essentially you got to only message your people you work with on your work phone and work devices. Like, don't say, hey man, come to the picnic on your phone, because then magically your phone is also part of a work device. I mean, I was going to say, that means that essentially every single device at your house is dirty. What do you do? Just factory reset it and then say, from this moment forth, I no longer do that? Or is it like forever,
So part of this is also like, hopefully you never have to get involved in a lawsuit as well. But if there's discovery as well, it's not potentially even inside your own company. Maybe someone else is suing your company. They'll basically do a big request, and then there's professional technicians who will basically go through and check every message and check the metadata, and then be like, well, these IP addresses are connected to this account. They'll put through a request to the courts, and then they'll get access. They might be able to be narrow of like only these messages or something like that related to work, but yeah, if it's work related, there's a chance not just inside your organization, but anyone outside of it will be able to essentially sue and get access. Usually the courts are pretty good about like limiting to that. So like to what's relevant, but they call it fishing exhibitions, where they'll basically do a blanket, give us everything. And unless you have a good lawyer who fights that back, sometimes people just give them everything. And then you end up with those potentially embarrassing messages that get leaked to the news as well, or get into a court, the record of laws. There's like that you written into the court saying like, yeah, so-and-so is a complete idiot, who you then have to have like that awkward conference dinner with or something.
Yeah. Well, my kids would be able to tell the court that right away, that yes, that is true. This man is truly an idiot. But it also sounds like, yeah, I mean, your personal life and work life are just fully merged if you use these devices. And so if you have buddies and stuff that you're hanging out with, but you also work together, like you got to be mindful of this stuff, because just like Doug was saying, if anyone sues your company and then they're just like, I need every single device who's ever messaged this human before. And it's like you messaged your boss on your phone about, hey, what's up with my time card? Magically, they might want to see your device. And then they'll find out that I'm an idiot.
Yeah. Moving slightly quickly, because we only have like 5 minutes left to cover quite a bit. I was also going to say, so we've talked about devices and that sort of encryption, and that's your first layer. Even if you have encrypted signals, that can be intercepted, and then as I was mentioning, potentially a couple of years' time, it could be cracked, or it might even be able to be cracked right now. So the next level of defense basically you want is to prevent people from intercepting those messages. And what you probably want, at the very least, your first layer is VPN. So if you haven't heard of it, virtual private network, basically it's sort of, it's a way of routing your traffic out to the internet, and it keeps it going from, say, like your local internet provider who could be sued, or basically they could go to the courts and get your information that way as well. So they could get all your records. But if you're using a VPN, it's a little bit harder. Also, especially if the VPN is located in a different country where maybe they have stronger privacy laws, or it'd be big pain for someone to get access to it. And I'll quickly, while we still have a little bit of time, because Heather actually uses a VPN for her work as well, if you want to talk about that for a moment.
Yeah. So each company that I've worked for has required that a VPN be used if you're going to access the server. So if I'm out, and not if you're at work, but if you're at home or you're out in the public, we have to route everything through VPN. So I can use the computer and I could go on the internet and I could go on anything that has nothing to do with work, but I would not be able to access the server. I can actually access email without VPN, but I can't access our server without VPN. It won't allow me to. So I use it a lot. I actually, because I was introduced to it many years ago through a company I worked for, I actually think it's a very good idea for anybody, even on a personal level, to do that. Let's say a lot of people like to work in coffee shops, and so there are people that sit in coffee shops and they look like they're, having fun, but they are actually trying to access people's computers and their personal information. So, they're doing it quietly and you have no idea they're doing it. But if you have a VPN and you route everything through a VPN, you are protected. But if you don't, it's much more likely that we'd be able to get into your computer, be able to access passwords to your bank account or whatever else that you have saved on your computer. So VPN is such a great tool.
Yeah, it's called a man-in-the-middle attack is what Heather was talking about. And basically, people will go to public Wi-Fi. And because you're going through Wi-Fi, they basically can see all the messages coming through. So if it's not encrypted, they'll be able to see the passwords you put into a website, and then they have your passwords. So there's great advantages. One of the other sort of nice side effects of a VPN is, depending on what service you get, you can put your VPN in a different country. And so you can break geolocking. So if you want to access, say, like the Turkish Netflix, because they have like 50,000 extra shows than like the American one, you could basically set your VPN, depending on the service, not all of them do this, but you could choose basically the exit point to be in a different country, and it allows you to effectively geo-break all those services. They're like, oh no, you can't access this from your country. So, if you want to expand your Netflix library, a VPN is a great way to do that. Moving on quickly though, VPN though is only essentially, there's still some issues with it. One, you have to basically trust your VPN provider. You can look it up. There's some associated, I think it was 7 or 8 of the top 100 VPNs are basically owned by the Chinese government, so probably not ones you want to trust. So your VPN can always still spy on you. So just having a VPN doesn't necessarily guarantee it. It's an extra layer of service. But if you want to get really fancy, Tor browser, Tor. So there's the Tor Foundation. They're all about privacy. They're basically set up to help journalists in, let's say, less than free countries basically stay safe. And they have a couple of tools I'm going to run through real quick. One is a Tor browser, and basically it sets it so that your messages bounces around a couple of servers. So when it pops out of the Tor system, it can't be tracked back to you. So people, again, at the other end, they might be able to intercept your message at the other end, and hopefully you have it encrypted, but they won't actually know it came from you. So if you want to use the Tor browser, I would actually recommend people, again, it works like a VPN, so you can also, again, use it to geo-break. Probably not use it for streaming because it's a network, and it can be quite slow, and other people might be using it for very serious stuff. But I'd actually recommend, if you have a chance, download Tor browser and actually just use it occasionally for browsing, because essentially you're helping mask other people that really need it. So the more people that use Tor browser, the harder it is through the mathematics and this network for them to be able to figure out who's sending what message. So if you get the chance, use the Tor browser. Like, that's the highest level of security in terms of messaging. So, again, either use like Signal, access it through a Tor browser, or use like a temporary email, access it through a Tor browser, or access Tor browser through a VPN as well. Just add that extra layer of security. And the last thing, again, this is from the Tor Foundation, is a thing called Tails OS. And this brings us back full circle to talking about company computers and stuff, work phones. And what we're talking about, if they have access, if someone has access to your computer, it doesn't matter how much encryption, it doesn't matter if you use the Tor browser, they have you. They'll be able to see whatever information you put on your computer. But there's a thing called Tails OS. It is an operating system, so that's the OS part of it. It's designed for privacy. It basically wipes everything after one use. You can put it on a USB stick. You put that USB stick into your computer. You run your computer, the OS system, from that USB stick. You do all your work, and basically it's like having a completely separate computer on the same hardware. And essentially, if you get really paranoid, you can just toss away your USB stick, and that's it. That's the operating system. Everything that was sent from it has already been wiped clean, and that's pretty much it. So you go with that layer of protection. So like encryption, but in case that's intercepted, try to make sure it's not intercepted. So you use like a Tor browser or VPN. And at the very bottom level, wherever computer you're using, download and use Tails OS, put it on a USB stick. So like after you've done it, toss away that USB stick. It should have wiped everything anyways, but that's your levels of protection. So if you really want to be anonymous on the internet and want to be able to send a message, that's the ways to do it. Temporary email, VPN, Tor browser, Tails, Sorry, one last one. If you need to send documents, again, from the Tor Foundation, there's a thing, Onion Share. So it's like a file, it's like WeTransfer, but again, it's sent through the network, and it makes it anonymous as well. Does anyone have any last questions?
Well, I feel like a spy or something. This is...
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to change my last name to Bourne, so I'll be doing all these things.
Wow. Well, thanks, Doug. This was great. Yeah. Very comprehensive and so useful in many different ways.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at ArchPodNet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about.
Thanks all for listening. Thank you to my co-hosts for joining, and we will see you in the field.
Adios.
Goodbye.
See you guys next time.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.